he has had more audiences, I'll call them, with people around the world than the Syrian regime had in more than half a century.
Yeah, exactly. As you describe, it's been an extraordinary 11 months for Syria for any number of reasons, some of which you've included and many others. Of course, coming out of 14 years of debilitating civil conflict and more than 50 years of Assad family tyrannical rule, I think, there is grounds for a good deal of optimism, hence the rush to Damascus, all of the government engagements that this new transitional government, despite its controversial history, has received. But then, having just got back from Syria a couple of days ago myself, the challenges that this government, and no matter what kind of government it was, the challenges this government face are extraordinary. And here, the beginning of a relationship with the United States will almost certainly be crucial in determining whether or not the biggest challenges of those, particularly those focused on the economy, are surmountable or not. And so that's why President al-Shara's visit here to Washington is just so significant and potentially consequential.
Yeah, potentially consequential. It kind of needs to be consequential, right? Rima, I do want to ask you the same question, but also note that you were just in Syria for a niece's graduation. It must have been great to be there as a family member. You hadn't been there in 14 years. What are your impressions in terms of where we've arrived today?
It is incredible to see that this visit is happening, the first ever for a Syrian president to the White House. And as you said, I just came back from Syria. It's my third visit since the fall of the Assad regime. I haven't been able to go there for 14 years. And every time it is an emotional roller coaster. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's always like good news, bad news in a row. You see things, you feel so optimistic and happy. And then a minute later, you hear extremely bad story. You see destruction. And it's a reflection of the reality on the ground. It's very mixed. People are still very polarized. The conflict is not over. So President al-Shara has a very, very complex and sticky reality to handle back in Syria. He does need external support, external backing. But I think there's a fine balance he has to balance here between the external demands and this very complex reality with people with very different expectations, including expectations out of this visit itself.
And at this visit, Rima, I want to ask you, what does he need to get out of this visit, and what do you believe his strategy is right now on that?
I think he's hoping to see an end to the U.S. sanctions against Syria, and we just heard good news about in that direction. We're waiting to hear the details. I think he would also like the U.S. to pressure Israel to stop its daily attacks on Syria and to help, of course, Syria to integrate again in the international financial system. But all these shifts he's making, I mean, to go and meet the U.S. president, being somebody who actually fought the Americans not long time ago on the ground on the other side, who been speaking openly against the U.S. until not very long time ago. So if we think about his base, his loyalist base, this is a very challenging foreign policy realignment. And I wonder whether he has strong enough internal legitimacy to support such a foreign policy shift.
Understood. Charles, as you said, you were just back from Syria as well. And when you look at what is in front of him today, what does he need to secure? What kind of a strategy will you employ? And to Reem's point, what is the political situation on the ground in Syria in terms of the way Syrians are looking at this? Because it has been almost a year, and in some cases, their situation gets more precarious.
Yeah. Well, let me start with the last part of your question to say that I think there continues to be a really quite significant gap in terms of the messaging coming out of the Syrian government about its foreign policy successes, about the many ranges of sanctions that have been removed over the past, 6 months or so. And there is an expectation on the ground that the kind of rapid pace of all of those achievements should be being felt by those on the street, whether it be in more electricity coming into their homes, more affordable food around the table, higher salaries and less inflation. And none of those things have really kicked in yet. And that's not necessarily the failure of the government. That is just frank reality that those things take an exceedingly long time to build up. But there is a big gap in expectations. And for me, I think that's one of the biggest, more kind of long-term concerns. But it's also the core reason why the Caesar Act sanctions, again, here in Washington, do need to be fully repealed. And as Reem said, we had, to what at least sounds like encouraging news announced just a few minutes ago, which is that there'll be a 6-month waiver or removal of those sanctions. But frankly speaking, having spoken to major multinational banks, huge businesses keen to invest in Syria, individual entities interested in investing in Syria, a 6-month waiver is just no way near enough. There needs to be a full repeal of that legislation. No one can transact money in large sums into the country. I had a meeting with the central bank governor just a few days ago, and he made it very, very clear that without the full repeal of the Caesar Act, there is not going to be a significant financial investment into Syria. It's just logistically impossible. And so it sounds like good news, but on a practical level, it changes very little from where we were an hour ago before this announcement was made. And there, the battle still is in the House of Representatives, where there's a small number of holdouts who are refusing that.
And Reem, you can understand some of the reluctance, though, in some corners of the United States, including some in Congress, who look at some of the revenge attacks that have gone on in the last few months and are wondering, can this president really handle the weight of everything before him? And I note that the UN has said that, that there were 1,400 civilians killed in March. They continue to investigate these crimes. There are communities, minority communities, that continue to live in fear in the country. Reem, you know that the president has said that look, he believes that all faiths should live peacefully in Syria. But practically, what more can he do on the ground? Because I'm sure that is what's stopping what Charles says, right? The 6-month stay. Well, they need longer than that.
Sure, but first let me just comment on what Charles said about the Caesar Act. I fully agree it needs to be fully repealed. Whether you're with or against this government, I think we all have to be in favor of full removal of the sanctions. I'm more on the political side of the new authorities, but I'm with full support behind repealing these sanctions because they are harming the Syrian people, all the Syrian peoples. Now, on the issue of minorities, I think all the security challenges, not just towards the minority in Syria, I think the solution is decentralizing the security sector. And I think al-Sharaa and his forces are still reluctant to do that. They still have a huge trust issue with the local communities. They need to include the local communities to protect themselves. There's a huge gap in trust as well from many of the local communities, whether in the coast, in Suwaida, sure, also in the northeast, towards this government. They're not going to build the trust overnight. So coordinate with them, let them protect themselves, let them have their own forces, but coordinate it, make it accountable to a legal system in Damascus, and then gradually build towards some, a different model. But right now, the level of fear we have in Syria, whether geographic, I said like in the south or the coast, or even within the cities. I mean, I was just last month in Aleppo talking to my cousins and relatives. They're terrified of leaving the house. So yesterday, our neighbor was driving her son to the nursery. She was kidnapped. And there's so many of these stories on daily basis, wherever you live. So he is struggling to get hold of the security.